Trifles by Susan Glaspell. We're in a gloomy farmhouse kitchen. We see unwashed pans under the sink, a dish towel on the table, and other signs of uncompleted work. The sheriff comes in, followed by the county attorney and Mr. Hale, followed by two women, the sheriff's wife and Mrs. Hale.
Ooh, this feels good. Come on up to the fire, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, Mr. Hale, before we move things along, you explained to Mr. Henderson just what you saw when you came here yesterday morning.
By the way, Peters, has anything been moved? Or are things just as you left them yesterday?
It's just the same. When it dropped below zero last night, I thought I'd better send Frank out this morning to make a fire for us. But I told him not to touch anything except the stove. And you know Frank.
Oh, somebody should have been left here. Well, Mr. Hale, tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning.
Well, Harry and I had started into town with a load of taters. We come along the road from my place. As I got here, I said, I'm going to see if I can't get John Wright to go in with me on a party telephone. I spoke to Wright about it once before, and he put me off, saying folks talk too much anyway. All he asked was peace and quiet. I guess you know about how much he talked himself. But I thought maybe if I went to the house and talked about it before his wife, well, I said to Harry, I didn't know if what his wife wanted made much difference to John.
Well, let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. Tell now just what happened when you got to the house.
I didn't hear or see nothing. I knocked at the door. It still was all quiet inside. I knew it must be up. It was past 8 o'clock, so I knocked again. I thought I heard somebody say, come in. Wasn't sure. But I opened the door, this door here, and there in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
Well, what was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand, was kind of pleating it.
And how did she look?
Well, she looked queer.
Well, how do you mean queer?
Well, I mean, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next. Kind of done up.
Well, how did she seem to feel about your coming?
I don't think she minded one way or other. She didn't pay much attention. I said, how do, Mrs. Wright? Cold, ain't it? She says, is it? I went right on pleating her apron. Well, I was surprised. She didn't ask me to come up to the stove nor sit down or nothing like that. Just sat there, not even looking at me. So I said, I want to see John. And then she laughed. I guess you'd call it a laugh. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, can't I see John? No, she says, kind of dull-like. Well, ain't he home, says I. Yes, says she, he's home. Then why can't I see him, I ask her out of patience. 'Cause he's dead, says she. Dead, says I. She just nods her head, not getting a bit excited, just rocking back and forth. Well, where is he, says I, not knowing what to say. She just pointed upstairs like that. So I got up, walked from there to here, and then I says, well, what did he die of? He died of a rope around his neck, says she, and just went right on pleating at her apron. Well, I went out and called Harry. We went upstairs, and there he was, lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs, where you can point it all out. Just go on now with the rest of the story.
Well, my first thought was to get that rope off. It looked, oh. But Harry, he went right up to him and said, nah, he's dead all right. We better not touch nothing. So we went back downstairs. She was sitting that same way. Has anybody been notified, I asked her. No, says she, unconcerned. Who did this, Mrs. Wright? Said Harry. He said it businesslike, and she stopped pleating her apron. I don't know, she says. You don't know, says Harry. No, says she. Weren't you sleeping in the bed with him, says Harry. Yeah, says she, but I was on the inside. Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him, and you didn't wake up, says Harry. I didn't wake up, she says. We must have looked as if we didn't see how that could be, for after a minute she says, I sleep sound. Harry was going to ask more questions, but I said, maybe we ought to let her tell her story first to the coroner or the sheriff. So Harry went fast as he could over to the Rivers place where there's a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew that you had gone for the coroner?
Well, she moved from this one over here to that chair over there and just sat there with her hands held together, looking down. I got a feeling I ought to make some conversation, so I says, I'd come to see if John wanted to get a telephone. And at that, she just started to laugh. And then she stopped and looked at me scared. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't scared exactly. I wouldn't like to say it was. Soon, Harry got back, and then Dr. Lloyd come, and you, Mr. Peters, so I guess that's all I know that you don't.
Well, I guess we'll go upstairs first and then go out to the barn and around there. You're convinced, Peters, that there was nothing important here, nothing that would point to any motive?
Nothing here but kitchen things.
Here's a nice mess.
Oh, her fruit. It did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire'd go out and her jars would break.
Well, can you beat the women? Held for murder and worrying about her preserves.
I guess before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about.
Well, women are used to worrying over trifles.
And yet, for all their worries, what would we do without these ladies? Oh my goodness. Dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper, would you say, ladies?
There's a great deal of work to be done on a farm.
Oh, to be sure.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
Ha, loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose you were friends too?
I've not seen much of her of late years. I've not been in this house. It's been more than a year.
And why was that? You didn't like her?
I liked her well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson. And then
Yes, Mrs.
never
Hale?
seemed a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had the homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know as Wright had either.
No, you mean they didn't get along very well?
No, I don't mean anything. But I don't think the place would be any cheerfuler for John Wright's being in it.
I'd like to talk more about that a little later. I want to get the lay of things upstairs now.
I suppose anything my wife does will be all right. She was to take in some clothes for her, you know, and a few little things. We left in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, but I'd like to see what you take, Mrs. Peters, and keep an eye out for anything that might be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson.
I'd hate to have men coming into my kitchen, snooping around and criticizing.
Of course, it's no more than their duty.
Seems mean to talk about her for not having things slicked up when she had to come away in such a hurry. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some here that's all right, Mrs. Peters. Yes, here. This is cherries too. I declare I believe that's the only one. She'll feel awful bad after all her hard work in the hot weather. I remember the afternoon I put up my cherries last summer.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet.
Wright was stingy. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the Ladies' Aid. You don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. She used to wear pretty clothes and be lively when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. But that was 30 years ago. This all you was to take in?
Well, she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail, goodness knows. But I suppose just to make her feel more natural. She said it was in the top drawer in this cupboard. Oh yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron, worrying about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in a speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake when they was slipping that rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. Must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
Well, that's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house. He says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said, coming out, what was needed for this case was a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. Wonder how they are finding things upstairs. You know, it seems kind of sneaking, locking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to get her own house to turn against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose it is.
Look, there's her sewing basket. Look, she was piecing a quilt.
It's a log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it.
I wonder if she's going to quilt it or just knot it.
Whew. Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Well, let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up.
I don't know if there's anything so strange, our taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to get the evidence. I don't see it's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here, this is the one she was working on, and look at the sewing. All the rest of it has been so nice and even. Why, look at this. It's all over the place. It's like she didn't know what she was about.
What are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
I'm just pulling out a stitch or two that's not sewed very good. Bad sewing always makes me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale.
what do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if she was nervous. I sometimes sew awful queer when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. I wonder where I could find a piece of paper and some string.
In that cupboard, maybe.
Why, there's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Well, I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny to think of a bird here. But she sure must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose maybe the cat got it.
Nope, she didn't have a cat. She's got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room and she was real upset and asked me to take him out.
My sister Bessie had that. Queer, ain't it?
Why, look at the door on that cage. It's broke. One hinge is tore apart.
Looks as if someone must have been rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they're going to find any evidence, they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be lonesome for me sitting here alone.
It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I had come over sometimes when she was here. I wish I had.
But of course you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house, your children.
I could have come. I stayed away because it weren't cheerful. And that's why I ought to have come. I've never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you can't see the road. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place and always was. I wish I'd come over to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I could see now.
You mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Somehow we just don't see how it is with other folks until something comes up.
Not having children makes less work, but it makes a quiet house. And right out to work all day and no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes, good. He didn't drink and kept his word as well as most, I guess, and paid his debts. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to pass the time of day with him, like a raw wind that gets to the bone. I should think she would have wanted a bird. But what do you suppose happened to it?
I don't know. Unless it got sick and died.
You weren't raised around here, were you? You didn't know her?
Not till they brought her yesterday.
She, come to think of it, she was kind of like a bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. Oh, how she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt in with you? It might take up her mind.
I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, what could I take? I wonder if her patches are in there.
Here's some red. I expect this has got sewing things in it. What a pretty box. Looks like somebody would give you as a present. Maybe her scissors are in here. There's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
What? That isn't her scissors.
Oh, Mrs. Peters, it's
It's the bird.
Mrs. Peters. Look at it. Look at its neck. It's all.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to quilt it or knot it?
We think she was going to knot it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. You found a bird cage, I see. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
Oh, is there a cat?
Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
No sign at all, Peters, of anyone having come from the outside, their own rope. Now, let's go up again and go over it piece by piece. It would have to have been someone who knew the place.
She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box.
when I was a girl. My kitten. There was a boy took a hatchet, and before my eyes, before I could get there, if they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt him.
I wonder how it would seem never to have had any children around. No, Wright wouldn't like the bird, a thing that sang. She used to sing. He killed that too.
We don't know who killed the bird.
I knew John Wright.
It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him.
We don't know who killed him. We don't know.
If there'd been years and years of nothing, then a bird to sing to you, it would be awful. Still, after the bird was still.
I know what stillness is. When we homesteaded in Dakota, and my first baby died after he was 2 years old, and me with no other than.
How soon do you suppose they'll be through looking for the evidence?
I know what stillness is. The law has got to punish crime, Mrs. Hale.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster when she wore a white dress with blue ribbons and stood up there in the choir and sang. Oh, I wish I'd come over here once in a while. That was a crime. That was a crime. Who's going to punish that?
Mustn't take on.
Might have known she needed help. I know how things can be for women. I told you it's queer, Mrs. Peters. We live close together and we live far apart. We all go through the same things. It's all just a different kind of same thing. If I was you, I wouldn't tell her her fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's all right. Take this in and prove it to her. She may never know whether it was broke or not.
My, it's a good thing the men couldn't hear us. Wouldn't they just laugh? Getting all stirred up over a little thing like a bird, like a canary, a dead canary, as if that could have anything to do with. Wouldn't they laugh?
Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters, it's all perfectly clear except a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. If there was some definite thing, something to show, something to make a story about, a thing that would connect up with this strange way of doing it.
Well, we got the team around. Pretty cold out there.
I'm afraid I'm gonna stay here a while by myself. Sheriff, you can send Frank out for me, can't you? I want to go over everything. I'm not satisfied that we can't do better.
You want to see what Mrs. Peters is going to take in?
Oh, I guess they're not very dangerous things the ladies have picked out. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think of that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not just that way.
Married to the law. I just want you to come in here a minute, George. We ought to take a look at these windows.
Windows.
We'll be right out, Mr. Hale.
Well, Henry, at least we found out she wasn't gonna quilt it. She was gonna, what is it you call it, ladies?
We call it not it, Mr. Henderson.